Welcome to the Gold Standard here on the 440 Sports Network, brought to you by Sinkers Beverages, Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. That is Emma Lingan. I am Braden Gall. Good to hear from you guys. If you want to jump into the chat, please do so. Emma, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I am well. And you?
That you sound pretty fired up to be here. It's like our 19th podcast in a row where the Nashville Predators have a losing record.
Yeah,
but they won last night.
They did win last night, and contrary to popular belief, the sky is not falling because their draft slot odds changed by like 0.5%.
Good Wednesday to you too, Kevin. Good to see you. And of course, if you want to jump into the chat, YouTube comments, turn them on, please. Thumbs up, notifications, all that great stuff. Rate, review, subscribe. Make sure you check out Sinkers Beverages for all your beverage needs, not just alcohol, but non-alcoholic stuff, THC beverages as well. Join the in crowd. They will give you all kinds of cool exclusive information ahead of time. Over 40 years, 4-time liquor store of the year. Fantastic company. Check them out. Shotgun Willie's Barbecue open today, of course. They open Wednesdays through Sundays, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Make sure you check them out. Avid supporters of the Nashville Predators as well. So lots of stuff to do today on the show. The aforementioned Emma versus Twitter weekly battle. Emma, I think, is still undefeated. I think you're like 44-0 in the Emma versus Twitter battle. But the one this week is the draft slot conversation. I don't know which players are going to be better, Emma. I am not a draft scout. You might be way more equipped to handle that, and I do feel confident in my abilities to gain that information once the draft gets closer. But for now, I think there are some rules of the road that fans that don't study this stuff need to know. Maybe a couple of guidelines, just basic entry points into the draft itself and what it means. Certainly, the draft lottery is going to be a conversation. Can they pick 3? Can they pick 2? Do they pick 5? They've got a couple of games with some bad teams. They can't really move up in the draft lottery from a percentage standpoint ahead of the Sharks or the Blackhawks. So we'll get to all that stuff coming up in a little bit. We were asked in the subscriber chat, myself and Adam, a couple of really interesting questions, always interesting, but these two I thought were pretty I thought they were relevant to our conversation on the show, which is about how these young players are being deployed. We talked a lot about it last week, but how they're being deployed, I think, is some interesting calculus. And then, of course, you've got a great question by George about some of the decisions that have happened since the Cup run in 2017. Should we rethink which ones you would go back and change? Sort of a fun exercise, also maybe a maddening exercise for some folks, Emma, to do that. You have a different perspective on the team, having worked for it and also not been around in the 17, 18, 19 era. So you didn't live through the Kyle Turris thirst trapping and Matt Duchene thirst trapping that took place. But we'll get to all of that. So which decisions would we change? And of course, Ovechkin on a path. A fascinating nugget from the game against Carolina that I want to ask you about. Just brilliant troll job by Carolina, in my opinion. And then, of course, Juuse Saros is where we're going to start with his 200th victory. Played a brilliant game. Nice to see that from him. First and foremost, before we get into all the complicated stuff, just he looked on it. He looked like he could see the puck. He was good from the beginning. They gave up some shots. The Preds did get lucky. There was a backdoor pass that missed and a post that hit, like as is the case in hockey. But Saros was very good on Tuesday night in a win over Carolina. 2 easy wins over Carolina this year. Go figure. And a win over Toronto. 2 basically for not first place teams, but close. Totally dominate. Can't beat Anaheim. Can't beat St. Louis. Going to be a fun one on Thursday night.
Such is life this season for the Predators. But yeah, I think Juuse Saros was tremendous against Carolina. Always seems to be. I was there in the building because this was when I worked for the team back when he made 64 saves at what was then PNC Arena. And it just like unreal. I mean, you look at games like that. If you turned that game on at any point and watched 5 minutes of it, you would know very clearly, very quickly who the better team was. And spoiler, it's not Nashville. And so Juuse Saros stole that game for them last night. And, while win is good for confidence, good for morale, good for the young guys like Luke Evangelista and Mark Del Gaizo, who played big roles in it. All of those are good things, but I would say that overall offensive performance by Nashville was not a recipe for sustained success. And, you can't be asking your goalie to stand on his head like that and do everything every night. But Juuse Saros is a guy who can. And it just seems like that's how it goes with the Preds against Carolina. It's like Nashville commits a shit ton of penalties and Carolina takes a shit ton of shots on net, and Nashville wins every time.
That's the recipe for success. I mean, you didn't know that?
Only against Carolina. It only
says,
works against Carolina.
Morning, Josh. Josh says, sounds like the Predator way to me. Look, here's the thing. It was nice to see sort of, I don't want to say like old Juuse Saros, but like he's clearly sharp, and it's good to see. Congratulations, of course, on 200 wins. He for those that are new, of course, and don't know the story, I can't imagine you don't, but the idea that he had to wait as long as he did to become a full-time starting goaltender, where he started 67 games 3 years ago, and then 64, and then 64, and the conversation around him, even though he was very, very young when he got up, so there was some wiggle room there in terms of, learning behind Pekka certainly helped him. The fact that he started 52 games, yes, he's leading the league in losses. That is a thing he's doing. But he started 52 games. They have, over their last 12, Saros has started 7, and Justus Annunen has started 5, which is the thing we've been asking about Juuse Saros for 3 seasons now, is when are you going to start to see this? And with very little to play for, obviously very intelligent to get the other guy more time, who, by the way, is lost in our conversation when we say play the kids. We don't talk a lot about Justus Annunen in that group, but he probably belongs in that group, a young player developing. Shows a lot of promise. 5 starts for him, 7 for Saros. That's what we've been asking for, especially in light of the fact that there's nothing to play for. So if they split the last 11, let's say 6 Saros, 5 for Annunen, which is, I think, a reasonable guess, he will be at 58 games started for the season, which is the lowest of his career as the full-time starter relative to an 82-game season. Finally, it took being one of the worst teams in the league for them to give Juuse Saros a little bit of a break at the end of the season.
Silver linings all around.
Yes, she has nothing to add. Just like, I guess that's one way of looking at it.
I mean, no, there are, again, when you get to this abysmal point in the season, you have to look for, and I'm not even saying like, look on the bright side. I'm just more being practical about it and saying, okay, clearly these are not meaningful games in terms of the standings or the playoff race. So let's make them meaningful in other ways. And that's one of them. And seeing what you have from your young kids, seeing what you have, from the backup goalie, giving Saros a break. Although I do take issue with the whole leads the league in losses stat. I mean, yes, it's a stat. It's correct. It's factual. But I think it doesn't tell the whole story because, again,
fake news.
I'm just saying that it's a number it's low-hanging fruit. It's easy to point to and be like, oh, see, Saros bad. And it's like, no,
that's not what I was saying. That's, by the way,
I know you're not. I know you're not, but I feel like throughout the season, it's been kind of a common theme that, oh, Saros is terrible this year. It's like, well, actually, no, the entire freaking team is terrible in front of him. And you can't expect him, like I said earlier, you can't expect him to do what he did against Carolina every time he plays. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think what's interesting, if you want to look at his entire season and you want to look at the numbers that, don't line up with anything in his career, right? Like a guy, it's the first time he's going to have a losing record. The first time he's going to be basically under a 900 save percentage. It's going to be the first time he has a negative goals saved above average, and it's almost -4, -3.8. This is a guy who was +23, +30, +5 over the last 3 seasons. It's clear that he has not been, his numbers are way down across the board. Losses is just a byproduct of all of that, right? But it's also the context and the nuance around that is just how bad this defense has been. And it's funny, we're going to get to this in a second when we talk about some of the decisions. One of the decisions that if you think about the defense and you say, what decision over the last few years has most impacted the defensive slide, like where they're at now? Because you can point to a million things. Carrier, Fabro, Shen, all traded away or cut or whatever. I think Ekholm is the one that I point to. But like many of the moves, when you look at the Ekholm trade, you go, man, this like basically Ekholm for McDonough was the same amount of money, roughly speaking. Ekholm was younger and I think better right now. He's having 2 career years in Edmonton. Certainly situation matters there. McDonough's fine. He's a really good player, really stabilizing force on the back end, but like doesn't make a ton of plays on offense in particular. I look at that trade as the one that the defense, if he still had Ekholm these past 2 years, like the defense would be in really good shape. And you might not have had to go sign Brady Shea, for better or for worse. But you look at the trade and you go, you got Reed Schaefer, you got a first rounder, I think you got a 4th rounder, you got Tyson Barrie out of the deal. You ended up trading, Tyson Barrie ends up, leaving. But like at that time, it's hard to not say that they should have done that move. But Ekholm to me is sort of if you want to talk about the defensive original sin, for lack of a better phrase, I think trading Ekholm is the one that changed the trajectory of the defense core, because Josi and Ekholm together or with some of the other names, you'd still be in pretty good shape right now today with those two atop your formation.
Yeah, and I think that, you kind of started to see the beginning of the decline, maybe didn't realize it at the time, but now looking back, the benefit of hindsight, you can kind of see what was happening with, when McDonough came in, the initial idea was, we're going to put McDonough and Ekholm together on the second pairing, and it's just going to be this amazing shutdown second pairing. And that experiment went horribly. And so they had to split them up. And again, that's fine. No one could have predicted, like, you don't know until you try. So they tried it. It didn't work. But then it seems like ever since then, they have not been able to get in that groove. And then, of course, obviously, like you said, they trade Ekholm, which I agree with you. I don't think at the time was necessarily a bad trade at all. But you are still feeling the effects of it.
Yeah. So we were asked about that, and because the 2 things we were asked about are sort of like, how do you deploy the kids? How do you use the players right to maximize their growth and potential and talent? And then what moves would you kind of go back, rethink, and maybe redo in a different way? That's certainly one of them. We'll get to that because there's a lot of them since 18 that have, there's so many decisions a franchise makes in any sport that affect your path and sort of where you go. But I want to ask you about the deployment of the players, because last night, of course, you saw Evangelista on the top line with O'Reilly and Forsberg. Evangelista with a spectacular goal there, giving the puck in the right position after a brilliant exit pass. Sort of the thing Brunette wanted all season long, or the fans wanted all season long, was that kind of play, right? Which is a quick exit, a quick burst to the middle, a quick pass, a nice move, and a goal. You got LaRue with McCarron and Bellows. Okay. Bunting, Stamkos, and Marcia Show. All right, I could see that one being a line next year, but okay. And then, of course, Cole Smith, Svechkov, and Sissons, which I'm sure is going to maximize Fedor Svechkov's development. What did you make of? So here's the question: two-part calculus here on Andrew Burnett's part, which is: does it matter what situations you put them in? Do you care? Is it like, hey, put them in adverse situations because they're going to have to learn how to do that anyway? Or do you put them in positive situations because that helps them with their confidence because they're fragile little children? I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. Maybe it's like, I'm not a parent, but I feel like if I were, I would be of the tough love variety and kind of like, you got to sink or swim a little bit. And so I think, I feel like how my parents were with me. They were always there to support me, but they were never going to coddle me or do anything for me that I should be doing myself. So I think that is like, you can't shield them from the tough situations forever. And I think, whenever you talk about like right or wrong, that's a different discussion. But I think, when you talk about Barry Trotz being a big culture guy and the guys that he's brought in, these serial winners and these like true consummate pros, a lot of when you call a guy a true pro, a lot of that is, how he deals with adversity and how he handles it. And I mean, unfortunately, you can't really become skilled at that until you do it. And that means going through difficult stuff. So I think that like I said, you can't shield the young players from adversity forever. I'm not against necessarily like, if you've got a young kid who's, played a stretch of like 4 or 5 rough games, bench him for one, fine. Like, let him collect himself, but then get him back in. because you can't just say like, oh, one mistake, you're benched for the next foreseeable future. And that's kind of what Brunette had been doing with these young kids, which I really did not agree with. So now I think that, there's a balance to it. I think that, yes, you want them in good. I just thought it was interesting when I think it was after the Toronto game when Andrew Brunette was asked about, oh, what'd you think? Luke Evangelista, big night tonight, 3 points. What'd you think? And he essentially said, yeah, like it's good to see him get his confidence. And hopefully this is something that he can grab onto and build something off of moving forward. And I'm looking at him like, that you can make that happen. You need to put him in the position to make that happen, because when you're burying him on the third line and or scratching him completely, then of course he's not going to grab anything from this. And so I think that looking at the situations that they're in, it needs to be a mix of both. And I believe it's going to be best for their development if you sort of intermix them with the veterans as opposed to playing all the kids together.
Yeah, I don't know if as a parent, of course, my wife and I are big on the value of the skin knee, right? Like you fall down, you hurt yourself, you learn not to fall down again. I believe in that, just generally speaking. I know that makes me maybe a little cynical, maybe a little old school. I actually don't feel strongly. I mean, I kind of agree with Josh here which is if adversity breaks you, you're never going to make it anyways. I don't necessarily believe that 100%, but I largely lean that way. I don't think where the situations you put them in matters in the ice on the, like, I think time on ice what matters. And honestly, both are probably helpful. A little bit of confidence in a positive situation and an easier situation, and a little bit of adversity in a tougher situation, probably all of the above is what you're going to need. So I actually don't think it matters how you deploy them. Time on ice is what matters. I do think it's fascinating because I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other about the lineup decisions also impacting their development. Luke Evangelista is going to benefit from playing with Ryan O'Reilly and Philip Forsberg. He's going to see how it's done. He's going to play with those guys. He's going to see how the puck moves. Like it can only benefit him. I also understand putting LaRue, Svechkov, and Evangelista together on one line and saying, you three grow together, build chemistry, learn how you're going to do it, because you might be our second line next year or for the next 10 years. Like so I see actually both of them as being smart. And is toggling back and forth the problem? Is sticking with it the right thing to do? Where are you at? Because like I don't know what Fedor Svechkov learns from playing with Colton Sissons and Cole Smith. They both bring really interesting and good parts of the game to his line, right? Like Sissons with what he does and the grit and all that other, and Smith with the intensity and the forechecking. Like I get that there's positives there, but they're not going to finish plays for him if he's setting them up, and they're certainly not going to set him up for any goal scoring opportunities. So where are you at? Like, I don't know what LaRue learns from being with McCarron and Bellows. Like I maybe that's okay for him. He's not as skilled, but like, where are you at on the deployment of the players within the lineup, trying to maximize their growth over the next 11 games?
Well, I hear what you're saying about, and I get it totally. The idea of putting the kids together and saying like, okay, develop and grow and build this chemistry together. As a concept, I agree with that. However, this team was not constructed that way. This roster was not constructed that way. I mean, if the whole reason that you bring in a Stamkos and an O'Reilly, etc., is to help these younger players develop, yes, of course, a lot of that is leading by example. But I do think that, if whether right, wrong, good, bad, I don't care, that is the cards that have been dealt here. Like those are the cards that have been dealt, and you have this unique mix of veterans and youth. So I think that in order to maximize the roster that you have, I do think that it's best to intermix them. When coming to the second line, on one hand, I do understand bunting. Like you said, that can be a pairing for next year. Again, Bunting's not a pairing, a line combination. Bunting is not a young player. He's 29, like you kind of know what you're going to get from him. Yeah. But he is a piece that is going to be part of this team at least, next year. And so you do want to see how he fits in with these line mates, these teammates, this system. So I understand that. He also, is one of your best scoring chances on this team right now. So, I mean, it makes sense. But I agree with Svechkov. It's just sort of a tough situation you're in with Svechkov because there are no playmakers on that line with him and no play finishers. Right. And again, Colton Sissons, Cole Smith both bring incredibly important elements to the game that are often very underrated. But you can't have two of those guys on a line with Svechkov because there's, like you said, it kind of clips his wings a little bit, I think. And so, I mean, the option would be what you put.
What about Svechkov between Stamkos and Marchessault?
So that's where I was going and saying that I think that for him would be better.
I think you need more. I think you need a distributor there.
Here's
maybe more. I don't know who that would be. Is Evangelista honestly would be one of the better wingers as a distributor, to be honest.
In general, though, I like Stamkos on the wing more than I like him at center. So I like the idea of doing that. He played better on the wing. We saw that, and yet he has been moved back to center. I think if you move, you can end up moving Sissons back to center on the third line, and then you have Svechkov on the second line between Marchessault and Stamkos.
What about, okay, so just so we're just having fun here. Stamkos, Svechkov, Marchessault. A lot of goal scoring, not as much distribution, but that's okay.
Well, I think Svechkov
Sissons
can be the distributor on that line.
True. I want him to. He can, and I also want. Honestly, what you want, all three of those guys can pass and score. So like you kind of want all those guys to do that, which could be a very talented, very skilled line. I kind of like the Leroux, Sissons, Bunting, or Bunting, Leroux, Sissons line. All three kind of have a lot of jam. They have a lot of grit, but they all can kind of score a little bit too. And I think that gives Leroux just a little bit more skill to play with. I like Bunting's goal on Tuesday night. I think that's going to be what he does, which is stand in the dirty area and annoy people. So like I think he could do that for 20 goals next year. I'm coming around on Bunting not being the guy that Barry Trotz was targeting at the deadline, putting too much pressure on him. But I am and I think we said this in our reaction pod to the deadline strategy, he is a really good asset next year all the way around. He's good at the trade deadline. He's good to score goals. If they're good, he's going to be valuable. If they're bad, he can be valuable. Like he's a nice piece to have. And I think he gives them a little something, a little bit of scoring with some dirty area stuff that Novak just wasn't delivering in that situation. So anyway, Bunting, Leroux, and Sissons could be interesting. And then you can just keep McCarron, Cole Smith, and, I guess Bellows down on that last line and let them just mess stuff up.
Yeah, I actually like that a lot because you put Sissons at center with Bunting and Leroux on the wing, and especially the two wings, those guys have more offensive upside, I think, than, your traditional, like they're not just like bottom six bruisers, like they actually can score. And right now, like you said, Leroux not really being utilized. It's like we're seeing with Andrew Brunette, it's like it's taken way too long, but we are finally starting to see
2 years.
Well, I mean, this year.
I know what you mean.
You're finally starting to see like, here's what happens when you deploy players in the correct situations. He has now figured it out with Evangelista. Now we need him to figure it out with Svechkov and then figure it out with Leroux. And I just don't trust that he is going to trust those guys enough to be in those situations.
All right. So I wanted to get that out of the way so that we could then get to the sort of decisions that could be redone, rethought. If you're going to go back and change something, it's a fun exercise. Obviously, that's all it is. It's an academic exercise. However, before we do, Sinkers Beverages, Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. Sinkers Beverages, you guys, 40 years of serving the East. Nashville market. Their sister store, Bluegrass in Hendersonville. It is worth a few extra minutes driving past your liquor store of choice to get to Sinkers Beverages. They have an extraordinary selection. Their staff is incredibly knowledgeable. It's a great place to go into. Sometimes you go into liquor stores, you don't like the vibe. Lots of good vibes at Sinkers Beverages. Huge bourbon selection. Join the in crowd, as I've said. You get access to those allocations early and ahead of time. And they might take you on a barrel pick where you get to go try bourbon for free and be like their bourbon, like designated free drinker trier person, which is great. I've done that a few times. That's a scientific term, Emma. And of course, they've got the craft beer fridge of the year in Nashville. You go in there, they got craft beer all over the place. Really, really good stuff in there. So it's starting to get warmer, starting to get hot. You're going to need some cold beer. Go check out their selection. A lot of great local breweries. They got everything. They got Southern Grist. They got Bearded Iris. They got Tennessee Brew Works. They got East Nashville Beer Works. They got Yazoo. They got everything from the local Jackalope, you name it, they've got it. So go check out all that great stuff there at Sinkers Beverages. And, of course, Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. Best brisket in the city, Emma. That's it. That's it. Best brisket in the city. If you want someone to cook cow properly, go to someone who cooked cow growing up in Texas. Shotgun Bill, Shotgun Willie, that's his name. Go say hi, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., Wednesday through Sunday. Go talk to my guy, Bill. He's great. Okay, so this is a fascinating exercise. And here, I didn't think, this is courtesy of George, of course, in the chat. George had said the Kyle Turris trade was number 1. The Askarov trade draft pick, I think is what he said, was number 2. And then cutting Matt Duchene was number 3. And Adam and I had a long conversation about all this, especially the Matt Duchene, Ryan Johansson stuff. So go listen to the subscriber show on Lower Broad Hockey. I kind of settled on 3 broad eras or moments in time that I thought were really important, and or I don't know if I'd go back and redo them, but I sort of said, like, these are the 3 that I thought decided the direction of the franchise. 1 I would redo, 2 I would redo, 3 I don't know, that kind of thing. Number 1 is the Kyle Turris trade. I think you go back, and after the Cup run in the fall of 2018, for those that don't remember, Matt Duchene wanted to come here. David Poile wanted Matt Duchene to come here. They were out there thirst trapping on the internet, and they settled for Kyle Turris, which of course included a trade where Matt Duchene was traded to somewhere else. Kyle Turris, after his 1.5 years, 2 years, fell off a map at 31 years old. After the Predators moved on from him, he scored like 3 goals in 2 seasons, and he's done at like 31 years old. Matt Duchene, of course, has had 4 seasons after leaving the Predators of 29 goals per season, 70 points a season, and a bunch of power play goals. So he's now, that's 4 full years after the pandemic where he has been back to sort of his level of production. So that's neither here nor there. I think Kyle Turris is number 1. I think that trade sent him on a path, on a direction, spending bad money after bad money after bad money. I think that's number 1. I think the hiring of John Hines, how it happened, is the concerning part for me, especially now that he's been fired. He's a decent coach, but a guy is not available in January normally for a reason. And if you want to fire Laviolette, that's fine. You needed to move on from him. I don't have a problem with that move. I think go through a proper coaching search. And if you still settle on John Hines, fine. But I think I felt like Poile was kind of chasing there a little bit in that moment. And that one never set well with me. Oh, this guy just got fired from New Jersey. Why is he such an asset right now that you have to hire him in the middle of the year? That was just a weird thing. Obviously, didn't work out. Good job, Minnesota. And then I think you can point to this entire summer as an inflection point where you go, we're going to go Saros instead of Lingan and Askarov, and we're going to invest $100 million in 3 veterans. And sure, it did not affect their long-term plan, as Barry told Pierre LeBrun on the Athletic story. But I think those are the 3 moments that kind of define the franchise. I think 2 of them I probably would try to go back and redo. This summer, I still don't, as bad as it's been, I still don't know what else they were supposed to do this summer. It's not, it can't take the cap space with you to next year. This isn't the NFL. So where are you at on those 3 moves? And then what are some other ones that you think were critical?
Well,
that you might redo. Sorry.
Regarding this summer, I mean, still, I think that you can't, that had always been the issue that people had with David Poile, right? Is like, go big, spend the money. Like you said, you can't take it with you. So Barry Trotz did that. And so, like, yes, it hasn't panned out, but I still don't think that he should be crucified for making that decision in the first place. Because it's, objectively, it did not look like a bad decision. As far as the John Hines situation, I hear what you're saying. However, I will counter with some. Now, of course, it's not entirely apples to apples, but there are situations where a coach is available in January and it's not, because they're a bad coach. It's just bad fit. Teams have had to move on. I mean, look at this year alone. Jim Montgomery immediately fired by Boston, gets picked up by St. Louis, has done very well there. Todd McClellan with Detroit. I mean, lately that hasn't been working out too well, but at first it was. And I think that is not, I understand what you're saying. I don't know that is a really like franchise altering move, in my opinion, for Nashville, but deciding to
hiring John Hines
season. The way, well, you're saying the way that it happens.
Well, it's both. I mean, it's the hiring of John Hines, but also how being so. I guess the feeling is that they were so completely convicted and committed to him. Is sort of why you do that in January, because like this is exactly what we want, is this guy who just got fired and is not employed in the NHL in the middle of a year for some reason. I just think that it was sort of, maybe you're right. I need to maybe rephrase how I'm saying it. It was the complete buy-in on John Hines, so much so that you were willing to do this without a quote unquote real coaching search. And while he was, look, I think John Hines was, do I think Barry Trotz handled the end of John Hines' career here in Nashville well? Probably not. Do I think John Hines does some things very well? Do I think he's doing a great job right now? I mean, these are all fair criticisms of my point. You fired the coach, so you shouldn't have hired the coach. I'm not trying to be too reductive here, but that's it. And you were so convicted with him that you did it without a real end of season coaching search where you would probably have more time to do more interviews and go talk to more people and do a broader, more authentic search. And I think that commitment to him, and that's our only path forward, I think might have put some blinders on the organization. And it did. I mean, it did shape the next 3 to 4 seasons of their, because that leads directly to all the sell-offs of the Ekholms and Tanner Giroux and all the pieces we're talking about, because they were like, oh, we're not going to win. We got to get rid of all these guys. So I don't know. I think I think it's an inflection point that maybe a different coach has this franchise going in a totally different direction. I don't know.
Potentially. I think, though, where I want to focus is on the whole Saros versus Askarov thing from this past summer, because I would argue that the issue there was not the decision to go with Saros over Askarov. The issue was the fact that they even drafted Askarov back when they did in 2020.
Okay, that's interesting, because that was George's point too. And I think at 11th overall at that spot, the best goaltending prospect in 20 years, I think you can take a chance on him. I don't have a problem with that.
But I think, if we're talking about with the benefit of hindsight now, I think if you look at that, I don't know how, I guess they didn't fully trust Saros yet, but it seemed like he had given them enough that, he was sort of going to be their goaltender of the future. And when you have a guy like that who is like your goalie for the future, then you don't need an 11 overall pick. I think you can get away with someone else as your backup. And I think the more important point to all of this is not just the, looking at whether you pick Askarov 11 overall. I think it's looking at who else was picked after him in that draft.
Which you can do for every draft pick in every draft in every sport, for the record.
You can.
But I agree with you.
Anton Lundell, Seth Jarvis, Dylan Holloway.
I got you.
That's all centers picked directly after Askarov. And that right now is what the Predators need. And quite frankly, it's what they needed in 2020 as well. It's not like this is a new phenomenon. So I don't yes, hindsight, of course, but I think that looking at the Predators' organizational needs, quite honestly, like goalie was not that high on the list. And I understand, it's all you want to take the best player available. I get it. I really do. But at the end of the day, I think you do have to have, especially, I think the whole you want the best player available strategy is a little bit more palatable when you're picking in like the top 3, not when you're picking 11th. I think when you're picking 11th, you have to have there's a little bit more nuance, and you have to have more of an understanding of, your specific organizational needs. I'm not saying that, of course, who can't use great goaltending, but I think that there were more pressing needs that they failed to address.
I'm going to start the way you should start every debate, which is hard to argue with anything you just said. There's some subtle things there that I would say. I think in hockey, it's different than football or basketball where you need someone to play right away. I think in hockey, you can take best available because you have no idea what your team's going to look like in 3 or 4 years. I think baseball is similar. Just because you have 3 starting ace pitchers doesn't mean you don't take the starting pitcher at number 4 overall, because you don't know where your team's going to be in 3 or 4 years when generally they're ready to play. So I'm actually a little bit more best available for baseball and hockey than I am for basketball or and maybe even basketball. It's like, it doesn't matter what position. There are no positions in basketball anymore. Just take the best player. Football, maybe it's more like, hey, we need a quarterback, and so we're going to pay extra for Cam Ward or whatever. So I also don't think goalies are like quarterbacks. I think goalies, you can have 2 great ones, trade one, they can play together and learn the way Pekka and Juuse did. I don't think it's like a quarterback where there's only one ball and you start every single game and throw every single pass and you're in there for every single play. It's not a 100-0 sort of backup starter relationship. And I think to your point, they weren't fully. I don't think they knew in 2020 exactly what Juuse Saros was, and so they have a great track record of analyzing, picking, and finding goaltenders. I don't hate the decision as much. I also think you're absolutely correct. I cannot argue with those 3 or 4 names that are after him in the draft. Can't argue that, but you don't know those guys are going to be good either when you take the scar off. So I think the thing that changes the trajectory of the franchise more, in my opinion, is if you had said to Kevin Lingan, and you're our starter, and given a scar off, and I'm not saying they should have, I'm just saying this is what would have changed the trajectory of the franchise. Said, Kevin Lingan, and you're our starter, we're going to pay you like $2.5-3 million bucks. The scar off, you're going to come up, and we're going to have this transitionary couple of seasons here where you're going to become our starter. Juuse Saros, we're going to trade for a huge haul and get this huge rebuilding thing going. And that probably means then you don't spend the $100 million on Stamkos and Shea and Marcia Show. Maybe you spend it in other ways. That does, I'm not saying that would be better, although almost anything would be better than where they are now. But that is, I think you have to put them all together into one redo, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think you can do one and then not do the other, or do this one and then not do that one. I think you have to do all of it together and say, we're not spending $100 million on a bunch of aging veterans, and we're not going to sign Saros. We're going to Lincoln and Askarov, and we're rebuilding deeply. It's a deep rebuild. But I don't know if I would have done that either. I don't have a problem. At the time, I liked the moves that they made. I thought the strategy was sound. So,
well, to your point about, guys like Lindell and Jarvis and Holloway, and even further down, you got Dawson Mercer, Braden Schneider, well, he's a defenseman, but Mercer specifically. I think, looking at to your point about, well, you don't know if those guys are going to be good either. No, you don't, but they play positions that you need and they have a better chance of helping your franchise long term. And I think that, again, I'm not saying that it was objectively a horrible idea to draft Askarov at the time, but I do think that you need to kind of take a step back and look. This franchise has not had a number 1 center really, since
ever?
Since I don't know.
I mean, Johansson played like it for a year, but that's about
it. That's kind of where I was going, is Johansson sort of. I mean, he was for that
honestly,
year.
It's coming. If Ryan O'Reilly plays 2 more seasons, like the contract he's under, at the same level he has the last 2 years, you could argue that Ryan O'Reilly was the best top line center this team's ever had,
which is problematic. And so,
heard.
And so I think that, and that's nothing against Ryan O'Reilly. I think he does a lot of things really well, but he is not a number 1 center. He is a perfect 2C. Everyone keeps saying, oh, the Predators need to find a 2C. No, actually, they already have one, and his name is Ryan O'Reilly. They need a 1C. And so I think that I know that, a lot of people are high on the pipeline, the prospects. I do not think that 1C is in the Predators
I don't either.
pipeline right now. And I don't even know that the 2C is.
I
Svechkov, maybe.
I think
But
I think there's lots of 2C options for the foreseeable future, which right now is O'Reilly, Stamkos, and then Svechkov. I think Svechkov has a chance if everything realizes. I mean, this is all, there's a lot to go into this statement, but like if it all works, I think Svechkov absolutely is talented enough and big enough to be a 2C. He's got to work on stuff like all of these guys, but I think he's more skilled than I've seen at that position in a while for this team coming through the pipeline. I don't think he's a top line guy, but I think he could be a 2C. Honestly, I agree with Mitch here. He says, look, they needed a 1C since 2016. I don't know who's the best 1C before that, but you could argue like since the inception of the franchise. David Legwand was a 2C from the beginning. If we're all being honest, Johansson's a glorified 2C. The never-ending search continues. I agree. I think I have a weird instinct on this, gut instinct. I've been saying it for a while. I think they're going to get someone at the end of the season with all the first-round picks. In between the end of the season or the end of the cup and the draft, I think there's a trade to be had in there. I don't know who it is. I don't know what it's going to be, but I feel like there's something happening that's going to happen in that window in that way. All right. So the other ones, of course, would be buying. Go ahead.
On that note, I would say I think that, obviously Barry's not parting with that first pick he has in the first round. I think you get a center with that pick. And as he has talked about, you potentially use one, maybe both of those draft picks, or you take picks from later in the draft as well, package those in a trade to get a true first pairing right shot defenseman to play with Roman Josi.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that either. So I want to get to the draft slot conversation here in just a second, but buying out Matt Duchene, I think you could have a debate about that. I don't know if he would ever been the player he is in Dallas here, but I do think 4 straight years of 30 goals and 70 points pretty consistently shows that he had a lot left in the tank.
What bothers me about the whole Duchene discourse too, and this is maybe more just like optics in the way it was sort of presented. I feel like he and Johansson got lumped together a lot in the just like sort of the discourse and the minds of the fan base. And I don't think that's entirely fair, because I think even up until the end of his time with the Predators, Duchene was still producing. I'm not saying that, he's, that he's never done anything wrong ever, but like I never thought it was fair that he and Johansson got lumped together, because I feel like Johansson had significantly fallen off, and to your point, Duchene hadn't. And so just the general portrayal of him as just like dead weight on this roster, I really didn't like, because he was still producing.
I don't know. So I haven't seen that kind of portrayal, like true dead weight. I would say, here's what I think, and this is what Adam said this on the show, on the subscriber show, and I kind of agree that there's like sort of an inauthentic element to Matt Duchene. He used the word phony. Not to be like rude and harsh, but sort of just like a little bit. There's a feeling, a vibe there, that it was sort of like, I don't know. You probably understand what I'm talking about. My issue is that Johansson and Duchene, and this is the analogy I used on the show, if you didn't hear it. When I take my daughters to a restaurant, they behave a certain way. Generally, they're pretty good, but occasionally they can get out of control, because that's what kids do. If I go to a restaurant with one of my buddies and their 2 kids, and there's 4 kids there, it's guaranteed to be out of control, because they are force multipliers. And so what I thought is that Matt Duchene is this thing over here, Ryan Johansson is this thing over here, but together on a personality level, they were force multipliers. And they're just a little goofy. They're just a little silly. They're just a little inauthentic at times, not taking themselves as seriously like Johansson, which generally is entertaining and funny. But I think together they were sort of this like thing that didn't really work the way the Predators wanted it to. And I think I agree with your point that they're 2 very different places in their career. Obviously, Johansson's done nothing, and Duchene is averaging 70 points.
I think that's a totally fair argument, to which I would add, fine, then get rid of one of them. You don't need to get rid of both. And I would have gotten rid of Johansson 100%. I don't think you needed to get rid of Duchesne the way that they did. I also think, I don't know. I think
I
that
don't necessarily
they're,
disagree, but I do think that's a critical moment.
yes,
Was cleaning house, and I also think that it's safe for Barry Trotz to come out and say, I wish Matt Duchesne the best. I'm sure he's going to go on and be successful for a couple of years, but we need to turn the page into something new. I'm also okay with that too. And just saying, we recognize you still have something left in the tank. We recognize it's going to cost us money, but we need to turn the page into something new. I'm okay with that too. So again, these are all just things that we could debate and rehash. So there's a lot of other ones. Again, we could talk about some of the other ones. I don't think any of the other trades are really, you go back and look at them. This year, you could look at the in-season dismembering of the old team if you want, and say Carrier and Fabro and Tomasino and Glass and on down the list of pieces that have been moved away. By the way, here's my hat tip to Carolina. They, of course, gave Brady Shea a little ovation there, a little welcome during the intermission in the first period. I love that they gave Mark Jankowski highlight package there. I just think that's damn good in-game ops. Oh, we're going to celebrate Mark Jankowski's record-setting 4 goals, which I think he now has 6, which is crazy.
6 goals in 8 games now. Yes.
Congratulations, Mark Jankowski. Oh, we're doing it against your former team. I just think that's hilarious to me. I just find that to be very, very Twitterish.
That was if you want to talk about the in-season dismantling of the team, again, I take no issue, quite honestly, with this was before the season, but Cody Glass, Juuse Parson, and Phil Tomasino, those I don't think move the needle that much. But when you then, for me, the big ones are Carrier and Fabro, because right shot defensemen are already a hot commodity in the NHL. Fabro, to me, inexcusable. You do not let that guy walk for nothing. And that's exactly what happened.
Yep.
Then Carrier, at first, I was willing to sort of give it the benefit of the doubt and be like, okay, at least you get some cap space here and you get younger, you get bigger. Those are all things that you wanted to do.
What are they going to do with Barron? They cannot play him next year. And
he's awful.
It's over $1 million. They're either going to have to trade him and give something up for someone else to take him. They can't eat the salary. I don't know what they're just going to have to pay him to be their 7th defenseman. I don't know.
Yeah. But again, he's an RFA after next year. So it's you're not saddled with him for a really long time. Either way, I'm like, that at least you get something for it. But I think that getting rid of 2 right shot defensemen, 2 top 4 right shot defensemen in the same year is inexcusable, especially with Fabro. I never agreed with the way that he was deployed in Nashville. It was either he was on the top pair with Roman Josi or he was on the bench, and it was, why?
So potentially misusing players in the lineup. Got it. Haven't heard that before at all about Andrew Burnett. All right, we're running out of time here. I want to be respectful of you. And yes, Kevin, I think they just showed it was a celebration of Jankowski in Carolina, while this other team that they just got him from was there. It's perfect. It's high level internet behavior by the in-game ops team for Carolina. I appreciate that.
It also did happen to be Carolina's first home game since that happened, but yes,
still convenient. Yeah. All right, so there's a few others. Again, the trade of Ryan Ellis, no problem with that. Trade of Victor Arvidsson, no problem with that. Adam suggested the trade of Kevin Fiala. I don't think Fiala was ever going to be that player here either. Tolvanen being released, you could point to, but none of these things individually change the franchise, and very few singular moves do that. I think you have to look at a group of moves inside of a moment of strategy, right? Like this summer with the Saros and the spending, or firing Lavi and hiring Hines, and then what that meant, or the dismantling of this, or I do think Turris led to a bunch of stuff, and he was so not worthy of the contract or the trade. Sam Girard would be nice to have right now, by the way. So I think it's interesting exercise to go back and do that. But here's what I wanted to talk about with the draft slot here. There's 11 games left to go. People are worried about this. Their percentage did go down from whatever it was had they lost last night, 10.5, and then it would be 9.1. There is a very small chance that they get the first pick. There's a slightly better, but also fairly small chance they get the second pick. They're not going to jump San Jose or Chicago from an odds perspective. They could close the gap. Other teams could close the gap on them, and they could drop to 4 potentially, namely Philadelphia. But what matters is sort of what do you need to know about the draft prospects? And Scott Wheeler from The Athletic, I think, just put out his new rankings and his tiers yesterday, so this is kind of appropriate. What you need to know is that Schaefer, the defenseman, not Reed Schaefer. Is it Michael Schaefer? What's his name? Michael Schaefer.
Matthew
Schaefer. He is largely
I've done the same thing. I've called him Reed Schaefer so many times.
He's largely considered the best prospect in the draft. He is a defenseman, but a lefty. This franchise, if its consolation prize is the number 1 player in the draft, and it happens to be a defenseman, if that's the worst you can do, not a bad spot to be in. Michael Misa is a center who, according to Wheeler and many other people on the internet who study this stuff, I do not study this stuff, I will eventually, that he is on the top tier with Schaefer. So there's 2 players that are sort of above everybody else, and that Misa has separated himself just so slightly from the 3rd player in the draft, which is Jeremy Higgins, correct? Am I right so far?
James Higgins.
James. God, I've got no one's names correct. It is Michael Misa, right? Okay.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
You got that one right.
All right, good. But here's the thing. So Porter Martoni, I don't know how to say his last name. Martone. He is a winger, number 4 on the list. Anton Frondell, which is just a fantastic name, a center from, I believe, from Sweden. He is number 5 on the list. And then I'm assuming because he is Canadian that this is like French of its background. Caleb, is it Desnoyers? I'm assuming Desnoyers. I'm pretty sure it's not Desnoyers.
Desnoyers.
I'm pretty sure it ain't Desnoyers. But that's the top 6. And then there's, by most everybody, those are the top 6 with a tier that sort of breaks. There is no chance in any way that the Predators are going to fall out of the top 6. So if there are 4 centermen, yes, you have rankings, and yes, as we get closer to the draft, you're going to have a feeling on which ones are better. But at the end of the day, there are 4 centermen that are viewed as among the best players in the draft. You might fall down and be picking 4th. I don't think that's ideal because I think there are 3 that are better than everybody else. 2 are centers. So really you want to be in the top 2 or the top 6. That's how I feel that people should look at this. If you can get to the top 2, great. You're guaranteed one of the top 2 centers. If you're not, you just need to be in the top 6 and you're guaranteed to get a top tier center. I think that's how people need to look at the draft for now, until we get deep into the scouting and realize that, one of these guys is elite and one of these guys is terrible or whatever, because it's impossible to know how good these players are right now, at least for non-experts.
Yeah, I mean, that's all of the just panic and outrage about, oh my gosh, the Predators cannot win another game this year because if they do, their chance of falling out of the top 3, their odds shift by 0.07%. Like, y'all, seriously.
Emma versus Twitter.
Go out and touch grass if that's really what you're concerned about. And I think that, again, it's not going to make or break your franchise, like the difference between picking 4th and 5th. I know people will disagree with me on that, but it's true.
I'm not one of them.
Thank you.
I do not disagree with you.
Thank you.
I can just hear you like, touch grass, everybody.
Emma,
Emma 45, Twitter 0. Still undefeated, Emma. You're still undefeated.
You need to stop calling these Twitter battles, because I'm not actually arguing with these people, because what I'm doing is not even dignifying them with a response.
Do you know who Paul Karski is, right? I'm assuming you know who Paul Karski is. Paul Karski has a certain personality type. He's got a little curmudgeon to him. He's got standards that I think are very high for certain things, and I respect that about him. But sometimes it gets in his New York personality with those standards, gets him a little cranky about stuff sometimes. And what I love about you versus Twitter is not that you're out on the streets getting in these, mudslinging contests with people. It's how incredulous you are with how people are talking on Twitter.
I'm not.
You're just like, I can't believe these people think Askarov should have been the player that was the goalie. I can't believe it, and I can't believe it. People need to stop that. I just love how every week there's at least one thing where you're just like, God, these idiots. What are they
Just
talking
because
about?
I think they're idiots doesn't mean that I'm incredulous regarding their idiocy. I'm not incredulous, but I am annoyed and disappointed.
It's just I can just tell when we talk about topics, it's like this. Oh, this is the one that's on Twitter that she thinks they're all wrong about, and they need to settle down.
Well, people do need to settle down.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. So I think that there's here's the other thing, because of their problems on defense. I actually don't think if they're stuck at 3 and they think Schaefer's the best player in the draft, and he's clearly ahead of the other 2 centers and the winger on their board. I don't think that's. I think I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I do think people need to be just make sure they've thought about it. And so I could, to your point about being incredulous, I would be incredulous on Twitter at people saying, "How could they do this? What, take the best player in the draft at number 3?" You can't be that upset by getting the best player in the draft at a position where you're not very good. So, if the consolation prize, if you get the 3rd pick, I just think there's some rules of the road. You want to be in the top 2 because then you're guaranteed one of the top 2 centers, full stop. If you're picking 3, you still might get one of the top 2 centers, but at worst, you might take the best player in the draft. And if you're picking 4, 5, or 6, you still get one of the top 4 centers, probably. 6 is I don't want to be at 6. 4 or 5, and you're guaranteed one of the 4 top centers or Schaefer. So I think there's a few different things you need to consider when talking about the top of the draft. That's all.
100%. And I think that you sort of need to change, not you, Braden, but the general you need to adjust how you're looking at success versus failure for the Predators in this situation. Because to your point, if you say, okay, if you pick in the top 5, you're guaranteed one of these players. That is true. So I think if you look at it that way and they do pick one of those consensus top 5 or top 6 players, then like you said, could do a lot worse than one of the top 5 players in the class. Where it would be a problem is if, and I'm not at all saying I think this will happen, but where it would become a problem is if they went completely rogue and picked a guy that's like, oh yeah, no, he was projected to go at 17th, but we really like him, so we're going to pick him at 6th. That is where it would be like, okay, what the hell are you guys doing? And so I think when you pick that high in the draft, it's really hard to mess that up, honestly.
Because here's the thing. Let's say this Porter kid, the winger, is going to be an elite player. It doesn't fit the need. But again, you don't know what your roster looks like in 3 years or 4 years when he's ready to play. I think you have to take the best hockey player. And this is outside a goalie. You don't need to draft a goalie. So in this particular situation, I agree. And you need to take somebody of value because you have other picks to get someone who's ranked 17th. That's the other angle to all of this. If you thought, hey, this guy is slotted at 8 or 9 or 10, and you think he's actually the best, and you're picking 4th, maybe you take him. But if you think you can get a guy at 11, 12, or 13, and you can trade 2 picks to go up and get that guy, and you can get both players, that's different. You've got extra ammunition this year to do that, assuming you don't make a big move before the draft to go grab a center from someone else who's already established in the NHL. Just saying.
I still don't know that they trade for a center. I say they trade for a defenseman, but I don't know that they trade for a center.
I think a move is coming.
Yeah.
If you don't believe in Barry Trotz, it really helps your mental health not to get spun up on who or where he picks. I mean, look, I understand where the franchise is at on Barry Trotz. Did you read the article with Pierre LeBrun on the Athletic? I don't think he said anything new in there. He's got to get some new messaging strategy around cleaning the porch and pen and pencil. It's just they're clunky. They're kind of clunky analogies, and the fans are already kind of turning them into 5-star hearts and champions of life kind of deal. You just need to kind of move on from those. I don't think they actually mean anything bad, but he needs to move on from them. I do think it was good that he kind of called out the veterans in that conversation by saying, look, we had some really talented players who've been around the league a long time, and it's taken them much longer to get acclimated than we expected. That was a pretty direct shot at the veterans not playing in the system quite well. Can't change the veterans, though. So we'll see. Anything you got on the conversation with LeBron?
No, I think it's like you said, nothing earth shattering, nothing we haven't heard already.
Yep, there you go. All right, they got St. Louis on Thursday, which should be fun.
Spicy.
Yeah, I like a good spice. I want to see Zach LaRue mix it up. I like that. Kevin says, I understand his pen and pencil analogy, but no one writes by hand these days. Untrue. The radio and podcast industry single-handedly keeping the legal pad business up and running. I have a gazillion legal pads in my office. All I do is take notes.
Did you ever, and this is where I'm like, I know we're of slightly different generations, but I don't know when this became a thing or not. Did you ever in school have to use those god-awful erasable pens?
I feel like they were a thing that we tried in high school maybe, but I don't ever think they were very productive.
No, they were horrible. And it was
Justin
like
Barron of writing utensils.
it was like, if you're gonna just make us use pencils, then ugh.
Yeah.
I'm still triggered by those things. They were so bad.
That's funny. It's funny. Like I've been so out of the pencil game for so long, but now I have kids doing homework, and I'm like, pencil. You got to use pencil. Yeah, we're gonna have to erase a lot of stuff. We can't use pen on homework, guys. Can't use pen. Yeah. But I'm not a pencil guy, but I do. I find, and this is not to go back to our anti-Twitter stance here, or my personal anti-social media technology stance. Go out and touch grass. It's good for you. I find myself a little beverage from Sinkers at the end of the night, a pen, the back porch, a notepad. I do all of my best show prep. I do all of my best writing. Everything happens in those moments, in some peace and quiet, disconnected with actual paper and a pen. The old radio host in me with the topic tree and this, how we're going to cover stuff. It's absolutely where I do my best thinking and processing for sure.
Under the influence of alcohol. I love it.
No, I didn't say what I was drinking from Sinkers.
Fair enough.
What's the old newsman's phrase? Write drunk, edit sober.
Yes, it's a great words to live by.
I use a different beverage from Sinkers, but it is a beverage from Sinkers, and it does enhance creativity.
I've been known to enjoy the occasional glass of wine while covering a Predators game from home.
I think you are a fantastic writer, so you're doing something right. Keep it going.
Thank you.
To Kevin and Mitch and Josh and James and all you great folks in the chat, we do appreciate you. Of course, Sinkers Beverages and Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. Go support those two businesses. You all are Predators fans. They support you. They support this product. You guys need to support them. I do appreciate all of you guys being such good supporters of the product. Go support Sinkers and go support Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. Where can everybody find you, Emma? All your stuff, all your works, all your talking.
Yeah, best place to go is, believe it or not, my Twitter, Emma_Lingan. Same handle on Instagram, but I post all my things there.
All right, there you go. Please check it out. We do appreciate it. Rate, review, subscribe on the podcast app of choice. If you do not give us 5 stars, you are a hater. Have a great week, everybody. Enjoy the St. Louis game. We will talk to you next time.